Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Christopher Claunch, and as always on the PPM Knowledge webinar series with Federico, I will be your virtual Toastmaster today. Once again, I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Sales here at IT-ROI Solutions, and really looking forward to bringing you the Moving SharePoint to Office 365 event today. And although the rescheduling of the event did not yield us our newest member of the IT-ROI development team, Federico and Luce are still expecting any day now. But I wanted to say thanks for your flexibility and understanding and rescheduling with us today. You know, today in our call we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've learned along the way in our own experiences with deploying 365. It's going to be a little bit of a departure from the normal IT-ROI product series that we do. But while we're waiting for just a few more people to get signed in today, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. Since we're on GoToWebinar, my beloved GoToWebinar, there's a console on the right-hand side of the screen. And one of the things that we encourage is that as Federico is going through a particular subject matter, he usually gets really focused and he'll be moving through it pretty quickly. But if you type your question right there in the chat, then what can happen is that we can nudge Federico virtually, or he'll see it come in. And at a good stopping point, we'll stop and address that along the way. And then, of course, at the end, we'll go ahead and have a Q&A session as well. We found that in the course of the webinar series that we've been doing over the last 3 years, that the earlier you get your questions in and the more that we have, the more beneficial it seems to be for everybody that attends. Next slide, Federico. At IT-ROI, we decided that with the ubiquitous nature of PPM solutions in the enterprise today, that we wanted to help people make PPM simpler. And what that means to us is how to make enterprise PPM software simpler to utilize and to get more value out across the enterprise. And what we've been noticing lately, and the purpose for our webinar today, is that as environments change, as people are moving, pardon me, somebody might have just logged in and it sounds like they might be driving and it's giving a lot of background noise. We won't identify you, we won't call you out in public, but if you could put your phone on mute, that would be great. Actually, I can. Excellent, thank you so much. That as we were moving ourselves in our own organization from Office on-premise to Office 365, and as we were helping our clients do the same thing, whether they be on PMO or ServiceNow, or even utilizing some of the tertiary project management stuff like Basecamp or what have you, that the integration that we provide has helped make PPM simpler. We started out doing services. We started out helping clients do migrations. We started out helping clients do integrations, do upgrades. And as we were doing that, Federico and team developed scripts, developed ways to make PPM simpler, to make it faster, to do their jobs better. And that developed into software. And that's how we get here today. So we just want to say that today we're honored to have Federico Pena, who has been driving not only the integrations between our customers, but our own company that has had to make that move. And some of the things that he wants to bring to the forefront today are some of the pitfalls that you might face. He wants to walk through the process of, if you've got on-premise today, you're moving to 365, what you might expect. Let's say that you're integrating your PMO tools, that you have 3 of them, and you're looking for a gateway, how we satisfy that, and how we recommend our clients do. and how the, really what the delta is between the on-premise deployments at 365. It has security, architecture, things like that. How collaboration changes as you move from the on-premise to 365 area. And then not only will we expect to have your questions, as I mentioned earlier, along the way, but also we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I always encourage people to challenge our founder and our CEO, Federico Pena, along the way, as it makes it more fun to try to stump the expert. So what I'm going to do without further ado is I'm just going to turn it over to Federico. It looks like, I'm not saying that everybody's in Fed, but it looks like everybody seems to have managed to get logged in.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks everybody for attending this webinar this morning. And as Christopher mentioned this morning, the main point of this webinar is to show people or to explain the different stories that we've encountered when we've moved some of our clients from SharePoint to 365. I would say that about 50% of our clients, and when we say our clients, we're not specifically talking about doing SharePoint services. We're mainly talking about clients that have bought some of our products that integrate PMO tools to SharePoint. And what we want to try and do is give you our sort of our point of view into what different clients have experienced during this migration. Okay? So if you're having a hard time selecting between SharePoint on-premise and SharePoint online, well then this webinar is for you. What we're going to do is this webinar is going to provide a basic overview of the primary differences between SharePoint Online and SharePoint on-premise. I'm not going to talk about the benefits to the IT department. We all know that cloud services benefit the IT department. What I'm going to talk about is how it actually impacts the end users, the business. Okay? Because the business is really the one that requires these services. The IT department is always going to select a cloud version strictly because they have a much lower cost of maintenance. They don't need the hardware. They're geographically supported. They're more redundant. It's basically a lot less total cost of ownership. We all know why your IT department wants to move to the cloud. What we're going to show you or tell you is what our clients have experienced of trying to move towards their business needs towards SharePoint. Okay? So the first thing is what you can and cannot do in 365. Okay? And there's several topics that I'm going to be talking about with inside of 365. One of them would be search. If your organization is heavy on search criteria, then we need to take a look into that. Custom development, business data. We're going to have a quick discussion about SharePoint and Azure, okay? And the administration of SharePoint online, and what you get and what you don't get. One of the things that will also, and I mean our opinion might be a little bit biased in the sense that because we're a development team, we found that obviously developing on 365 is a little bit more complicated, so you're going to get a little bit of a biased opinion in the sense that SharePoint itself can have the same type of functionality, but it cannot allow you to do the same types of customizations. Okay. So I'm going to start off with search capabilities now. Both SharePoint on-premise and online have search capabilities. The biggest difference is what their search indexes can include, right? Typically when the phrase, enterprise search is used, it means that the search engine can index multiple and disparate content sources, right? Like, especially if you use BCS, which is Business Connectivity Services from within inside of SharePoint, okay? SharePoint has long been capable of indexing SharePoint content, right? As well as another key component is content stored on file shares, Exchange, websites, Lotus Notes. Starting in 2007, Microsoft added the capability of indexing structured data from databases and other applications through their business data catalog. This feature has since matured, is now called, like I said, business connectivity services. Now the same isn't true for SharePoint Online. The search engine can index all the content stored in SharePoint and sources connected through BCS, but not index file shares or other websites such as, as I mentioned before, Lotus Notes, that kind of thing. The capability is largely constrained based on where the SharePoint Online is hosted. So if you have enterprise applications that are on-premise, your SharePoint isn't going to be able to search information without opening up a firewall port. So search capabilities are somewhat limited on the online version. Okay. Custom development. Okay. For both good reasons or not, and I assume a lot of you are PPM users, and for those of you that are on demand or on the cloud, you know that you're limited to configuring the application. So for good reasons or bad, custom development doesn't really fit into the new app model. Okay. And when I say the app model, Microsoft has changed the way development can be done with inside of their SharePoint services from web parts more into what are called app parts, right? So like closely integrated web parts, custom entity extraction, connection to enterprise systems that require more of a traditional custom development approach would not be allowed with inside of the SharePoint platform. Now there are ways to accomplish this, but you cannot do it directly from within inside of SharePoint. We're going to cover how you can do custom development inside of 365 and what the pros and cons of each component is. But I think one of the biggest deal breakers with inside of SharePoint Online is really the administration and the type of, I'm going to say, problems that you're going to get from your SharePoint admins, right? Which is that SharePoint Online starts at the site collection level. So I'm not necessarily sure how familiar all of you are with what a site collection or a SharePoint farm is, but think of a site collection as a single set of websites that belong to a SharePoint farm. But if you're a large SharePoint organization, you might have hundreds of site collections. So to not be able to administer this at a global level is really going to become an administrative nightmare. So, I would consider this a possible deal breaker for some aspiring SharePoint farm administrators, right, with Office 365. If your farm management begins and ends at the site collection and not at the web application level, you have no ability to create or manage web applications in 365. The results obviously are, you end up in an unfortunate situation of having to maintain all your infrastructure components, including things like my site host, within a single tenant of a web application, which I would say that most admins would consider this not cool, right? Business data is another component that a lot of our clients have encountered issues with, right? You can't really manage to connect business data inside of SharePoint without some serious custom development, right? Although Microsoft is coming out with some new tools that allow you to connect to this, there are other limitations, which are if your enterprise applications are within inside of your network, then you need to make sure that your security team allows them to connect to that particular SharePoint by opening up a firewall port. Now, because it's a cloud application, there isn't necessarily a fixed IP based on your SharePoint. Therefore, opening up ports to those particular business applications can become complicated. And therefore, especially if the connection begins from SharePoint, so if the communication layer starts at the SharePoint level, it's going to be much more difficult to go through the firewall. If the communication starts with inside of your network, so let's say you have you're a company that likes to run SAP and Oracle Financials and other things. If you have SAP and Oracle connecting to your SharePoint is going to reject that particular connection if it comes via a web service call. So those are some issues that we'll be talking about once we get into the actual integration layer of how to integrate and what possible workarounds that you get. I'm going to talk a little bit about SharePoint and Azure. And the reason I'm going to get into Azure is really, the Azure platform is what's becoming a platform as a service. So Microsoft is trying to decouple SharePoint from all of its other tool sets and provide Azure as the common platform. And the reason is because you cannot install applications directly on the 365, you need to actually install these applications within inside of a separate web server. So this is why Microsoft has provided you with an Azure platform within inside of your 365 license. So, Microsoft's made no secret about its plan for a universal cloud platform, right? It wants to be in the business, and Microsoft is, obviously a cloud leader in infrastructure, service, and platform as a service, with, competing with companies like Amazon and Salesforce and Google, right? But starting with SharePoint 2013, Microsoft radically changed the custom development approach, casting off the within the farm component development model and pushing you to do all of this development within inside of a third-party server. So in SharePoint 2013, it introduced the app model, as I mentioned before, the CAM, Cloud Application Model, so which separates SharePoint from custom technologies that customers or independent vendors might construct, meaning you can't put these particular app models within inside of SharePoint. It wants you to put them on a separate web server. So along with this change, Microsoft introduced the relationship between Azure and SharePoint. So by default, apps created by customers are going to be hosted in Azure. So which means your SharePoint will now, instead of containing all of the logic, your SharePoint is going to communicate to your Azure server, and your Azure server is going to bring back the information and send it to your SharePoint. So that's what you can and cannot do now. There are a couple of things that, if you're a big SharePoint shop, and especially for those of you that are SharePoint developers, there's a lot of things that 365 makes very difficult for you to do. So such as, any kind of auto deployment or synchronization of branding, master pages, any other customization packages, such as WSPs, document templates, many aspects of configuration you don't get, types of search settings, as best bets, search suggestions, search schemas, that kind of thing are not available on 365. Another one is user profiles, custom properties syncing across Office 365 and on-premise profiles, right? So if you're thinking of having a hybrid approach, this requires definitely a lot of thought and quite a bit of custom development to make sure that your 365 can actually talk to your SharePoint on-premise. Okay, I'm going to get into integrating your PMO tools on-premise versus 365. Well, we all know on-premise is relatively straightforward. You write your custom WSPs, you deploy them to your SharePoint, you got custom web parts, you can now have the ability to bring data in, display it, feed it into SharePoint lists. This isn't necessarily the case with inside of 365. So there's really two ways to do it. If you didn't want to use the Azure platform or a separate web service platform, the best way to approach this would be to write your particular application 100% JavaScript. Okay? And what this means is because it's executed at the browser level, then it doesn't actually need to hold any of the logic within inside of the SharePoint server. So you think, well, great, that's an easy solution to get around all of this, and we're going to do everything inside of JavaScript, except there's a major drawback with inside of utilizing JavaScript, which is JavaScript cannot elevate privileges as an administrator. Okay, what this means is, let's say you need to create a site or you need to create something inside of SharePoint. Well, because the logged in user that logs in, which is really what the credentials that SharePoint is using to perform a particular action, might not have administrative access. So when he goes in, he might not have the ability to create a site. Therefore, we need a way to elevate those particular rights. So as an administrator, so the administrator can actually create these. JavaScript is not able to do this, but so there are workarounds to get around this. One of the most common ways to do this is to utilize a workflow to impersonate a user. So as you open up your SharePoint site, a workflow kicks off, and this particular workflow can now impersonate or upgrade the security privileges needed to perform a particular action. The pros are that you don't need to have a separate web server to be able to hold your applications. The con is that you need time for that workflow to actually execute. So, there's pros and cons. The pro would be to the IT department because it's easier development. The con is to the business user, which is going to be a little bit slower. Okay? Obviously, the most common way is to utilize a web server that must be configured as a middleware. I keep mentioning Azure, and just because Azure already comes with your package, so therefore, it's already approved by security. There's no need for you to be able to get any type of approvals from your security team or anything to be able to accomplish this, because your data has already been, let's say, protected by the Microsoft data center services. The other drawback with both of these options is these options work great if both applications are on cloud. Okay? If your other enterprise application is on premise, then you run into the difficulty of having to deal with your security team to be able to get approval to make sure that that particular SharePoint connection can talk to that enterprise app within inside of your firewall, which means you got to open up a port, usually not necessarily the easiest battle to fight. As you guys know, most battles that are fought, the easiest ones to fight are with anybody except for IT security. Next topic is collaboration. And when I talk about collaboration, I'm talking not only about, team collaboration, chats, blogs, that kind of thing. I'm also talking about documents. Okay? Documents have pros and cons. Okay? The pros are that you can share your documents with absolutely anyone that's connected to the internet without the need of giving them VPN access or access inside of your organization to be able to share information throughout the world. Okay, that's the case with 365. On premise, you have to make sure that you talk to your admin. Your admin adds an Active Directory account for that particular user. That particular user can now log in and be able to visualize team collaboration. But now that 365 came out, they came out with this concept called OneDrive for Business. And OneDrive for Business allows you to synchronize documents across from your desktop across to the cloud, and it's great. It provides a terabyte of data per user, which should be lots. The main issue is because it utilizes SharePoint as the storage platform, then you can now have the limitation of file name limitations, such as special characters, file name length, folder name length. So everyone knows that people like to give weird names and use special characters inside of each file. Well, now that you have these, they're not going to sync, and it's going to pause your syncing of your documents to your SharePoint. This causes quite a major issue with inside of your organization. So I'm gonna come back and say, you know, obviously, as you've noticed, most of this webinar we've focused on what pitfalls we've had and, you know, what our clients have experienced. And I would say that most of our clients that have moved to 365 have had, let's say, a harder time as the business. Like I said, the IT department loves it because it's less work for them, but the business has a much harder time achieving their customizations and their personalizations that they require into their SharePoint. So if the question is, would I recommend that you move to 365, what I always tell clients is say, think very, very hard about whether you should move or not. I mean, Microsoft is going to force us to move, right? but at some point, we want to make sure that we've made the right decision. And, you know, like I said, we've had a lot of clients experience a lot of pain. And if you're planning on doing any development, if you're on premise and you're planning on doing any development inside of your SharePoint, you know, I highly recommend that you do the development in the CAM model now. And the reason is, if you do it,
yes? Can you explain CAM at the front end of this description for people who don't know?
Yeah, the CAM is the Cloud Application Model. So it's basically, I'm not going to say a new language similar to .NET, but I'm going to say something close. It's basically a new development form within inside of the SharePoint 365 platform.
Okay, excellent.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought here for a second. So what I was getting back to is, you know, do your development in the new cloud model, cloud application model. And what this will help you do is it becomes very easy to port to your 365 platform when you do have to move. Now, let's say you don't have to move. Obviously, you know, we noticed that app parts and web parts, although they're very similar, web parts are substantially faster than app parts. So moving your apps from the CAM model to on-premise model is super easy. Going the other way around is a complete rewrite. So that's why I recommend people that are going to do any type of development with inside of SharePoint that they really look towards doing it in the new model. Like I said, migrating backwards is easy, migrating forward is a rewrite. So you want to just be somewhat careful with that. I'm going to stop here for a couple of minutes. I'm going to see if people have any questions. I see one here. What percentage of IT-ROI software customers have upgraded to 365 and how are they doing with it? I would say, and Christopher, you might be able to provide a better answer, but I would say it's somewhere around 50%. And I'm going to say that, you know, the ones that are not on 365 are definitely looking at it. And I would say that, you know, for most it's on the roadmap, and strictly because they're going to be getting forced by Microsoft at some point or another. Everything's going to be on the cloud. Now, yeah, how are they?
I would say, Federico, in process of the upgrade would be 75. When they may still be working in their old environment, but they've already started the upgrade, and I haven't talked to somebody who isn't planning on doing it very soon. So that would be almost everybody.
And how are they doing with it? I would say that some people are doing okay with it. Some people are struggling, right? Like I said, the bigger your SharePoint shop, the harder the migration is. I would say that most people use the hybrid approach to start and just use a very small component of 365 to start, and then move on as they move little pieces into it. But it's definitely not a process that you can say, we're going to move next month, let's just do it. It requires quite a bit of thought. And internally inside of our organization, we have already been put on the pick list to migrate to 365, and a lot of our staff has been forced to move to 365. And I know, for example, Christopher, who's on the call, has struggled quite a bit, strictly because it's a new way to do things if you're not familiar with the cloud platform. So once you're in it, it makes it a lot easier, but those first couple of weeks are tough.
Yeah, Federico, the interface itself for me is, I really enjoy it, but for example, this morning, it continues to ask me to log into individual applications in 365, whether it be business, Skype for Business, whether it be Outlook, whether it be PowerPoint. I've done something configuration-wise where I didn't set up that, maybe I didn't check a box to remember me or what have you, but that initial start to go through 7, and we always talk about the fact that maybe one day somebody will generate an effective single sign-on technology that'll be like retinal scan driven or something like that. But to do 7 or 8 logins, as you move into your, what I would call my enterprise workspace, which is everything I use, is tough. And but the interface itself, right, the drop-down boxes, the way it remembers where I was at within the organization, like I need a SharePoint document or I need a security document, and when I go to send it to a customer, it's there in the drop-down in my toolbar now, and I don't have to go search the file structure for it. I mean, there's a lot of cool things too. So you're right, it's the initial shock of
So what Microsoft's trying to do there, Christopher, is it's not that it's forcing you to utilize the applications on the web. It just sort of hides the links to your desktop applications.
Right.
So because it hides the links, then you sort of think that you have to go through the web platform, but really all of those applications still exist on your desktop.
Right.
I guess that would be partially my fault, because most administrators would want to make sure that when that package gets pushed to you, that your end user experience doesn't fail.
Yeah.
Now, I have another question here that says, what is the difference between Azure in the cloud and not in the cloud? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. But basically, think of Azure as a separate server that gets provided for you, where you can install applications and have SharePoint connect to it. So as I mentioned before, SharePoint is really thinking of decoupling all of its apps. TFS is going to get moved. All of these apps were previously connected together through and utilized SharePoint on-premise as its display platform. Now that's getting moved away, and what they're utilizing is they're forcing you to use a separate web service or a separate web server to connect. Azure just happens to be the cloud platform that Microsoft provides, included in your 365. Before I go any farther, I am going to provide a couple of links. For those of you that are considering moving to 365, I'm going to provide a couple of links. One of them here is a great little Excel matrix that shows you what is supported from SharePoint on-premise versus 365. The different types of Office 365 plans and what you actually require, and which types of Office 365 online that you would require. Okay. Next one I have is a great little questionnaire. Like I said, a lot of the times these types of decisions are made by your IT department, but as business users, you want to be careful. You want to make sure that it fits your business model, right? Your IT department is going to say, well, yeah, we're going to move because all of a sudden we need less server, less IT department, less administrators, less hardware, less et cetera, right? Just, try and fill in these questions, and it'll give you a good answer whether you're a good fit to move or not. And then another good website that I'm going to provide a link for is, where is your organization at, and how smart is it to move right away, or how quickly you should start planning on moving so you might?
I went ahead and put a couple of more questions in your I think, or one or two in your chat.
I got another one here. Does your company provide training and services for SharePoint? Yes, of course. Although we started off being strictly a PPM shop, we moved into the SharePoint services because we found there was a great need for clients to integrate their PMO tools into SharePoint. And since then, we have developed quite a large SharePoint practice. So yes, we do provide services for both development, training inside of SharePoint, both on-premise and 365.
Now, Federico, is that for SharePoint as it relates to HP PPM, ServiceNow PPM, CA PPM, or is this, when you say SharePoint development, are you talking about helping people with integrations to the PPM tools, or are you talking about services and training at large?
Both.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was clarified because I think the question was related to SharePoint at large.
Okay, yes, we definitely provide services for SharePoint, and like I said, we provide services for both on the 365, on the cloud application model, as well as on-premise. As I mentioned before, we do, because we've been doing a lot of development and we've had to migrate all of our tools to the cloud application model, we have learned through the process that it's easier to develop on 365 first and then move to on-premise. So whether we do your development for on-premise or on 365, we're going to do it on the cloud application model. So the day that you do have to move to on-premise, you will be able to just, I'm not going to say strictly just click of a button, but your migration will be a lot more painless.
Excellent. You know, this is sort of related to that question, Fed. It just came in on my screen as and I know I can answer this question, but you always do it so much better than me. It says, what products do you have for SharePoint? And I'm going to make an assumption that that's SharePoint with respect to the CA PPM.
Okay, I'm gonna lead people actually to our website. We have several products from within inside for SharePoint. So what we do is we connect your PPM tools to SharePoint. So if we look inside of the SharePoint link, you know, we've got solutions for CA PPM. What do we have for CA PPM? We've got a product that automatically builds sites, shares security from your PPM tool directly into SharePoint, makes your CA PPM automatically bidirectional, allows you to do ideation directly from SharePoint and then feed those two ideas to your CA PPM, as well as we have a timesheet component. So for your users that don't want to have to log into Clarity to enter times, they can now do that directly from within inside of SharePoint. We also have similar components for the HP PPM tool set as well as ServiceNow.
Excellent.
Go
ahead.
Question that just came in here. Have your customers usually required ISP bandwidth upgrades to handle the network demands of 365? Absolutely. Especially around documents and, you know, synchronizing your initial document set. You know, there's no easy way for you to take your terabytes and terabytes of data and, you know, send a hard drive to Microsoft and say, can you plunk this in? The only way to really do it is through the internet. So I would definitely say initially there is a huge bandwidth requirement for clients. I would say once you're migrated and you have all of your data within inside of SharePoint, it's much easier. But, you know, initially, because you have to move all of that data there, it does require, and what most of our clients have done is they just have a separate connection strictly for that migration, so they're not impacting any of the end users.
I had a question about, and I know we get this quite a bit with our document boss, Federico, and you just mentioned it right at the end of your answer there. What about the migration of old documents with respect to CA PPM? And if you do decide to put those documents in SharePoint, what is required for that?
Okay, well, I mean, so migrating your documents into SharePoint is fairly straightforward. You know, SharePoint has, because it's a Microsoft product, and if you use Windows like 99.9% of the people, then Microsoft has an easy way for you to map network drives, right? So migrating your documents into SharePoint is always easy. Migrating your documents out of Clarity, or I'm going to say just about any PPM tool, is where it becomes a little bit more painful.
Okay.
There are tool sets available. There are some third-party tools available to do that, which is probably going to be my recommendation. But like everything, you know, as the previous question came up, bandwidth does become a definite issue.
The limiting factor, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. I know, Federico, we're coming up against the end of our shorter webinar today at 45 minutes, and I don't have any questions in my queue that are left. Do you?
I don't see any on mine either.
Can you do something real quickly, Federico, and just type in KB at IT-ROI Solutions?
Sure.
For the more like technical users in the group, and for people that want to take a little bit deeper dive, the knowledge base that we have put together and our awesome team of developers and Federico have been able to put together over the years is going to be listed at kb.itroisolutions.com. And what you can do in here is you can get as deep as looking at product guides, architectures. You can really dig into the products here if you'd like to, if you had any questions about what we do outside of this. Another thing is that on our website there's always a leave a message or ask a question, or there's places on the website where you can do that. If you have some ideas on something you'd like to see us do a webinar about that's informational in the future to help out, let us know. And we'll be more than happy to consider that and hopefully put it on the docket for sometime later this year, because we want to talk about the things that are, you know, the highest level of interest to you people out there that are supporting us. So, Federico, do you have anything further that you'd like to share?
No, I would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar, and please feel free to ask any questions or concerns that you may have.
All right. Well, thanks everybody again for your flexibility and understanding with the reschedule, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you very much.